Welcome to this episode of the Savvy Founder podcast. And today I want to talk about something that tends to happen when we are in this place of business where behind the scenes, everything feels like chaos. Perhaps you have really big, audacious goals, but it feels so uncomfortable to take the risk of it potentially not working out as you plan. There's a really great quote on this by Jim Rohn, and it says, "If you are not willing to risk the usual, you will have to settle for the ordinary." I think as an entrepreneur, this alone is probably the biggest fear that some of us have is being stuck with ordinary. And I think this is something that I've thought about a lot while I was working. What is real risk? Is it the perception that we have of what could go away temporarily, or is it what we lose by staying where we are? And I heard this quote, and I can't remember where I heard it from, but it was along the lines of the worst case is if you meet the person you could have been. And it's always a good way to check in with yourself. Who are you being with the decision that you are making right now? And I view it as there's two different hats. You have where you are right now, and then there's the one of potentiality. And if we always do things from the place that we're at right now, we have to understand that we are literally what we're experiencing currently is a sum of all of our past experiences, beliefs, actions, thoughts, behaviors. Everything that we've done has created what we have right now, who you are right now. And when we are striving to attain something that we don't yet have or have not yet realized in our reality, it's so important that we think about who are we actually being in the process of even attempting to make that thing happen. So let's dive in. I'm so excited. This is something that in NLP we talk about and deal with a lot, especially when it comes to the subconscious mind of who are we being. And so much comes from the identity of who you are taking on. And I find that when we take that piece of understanding how much identity has the power to influence everything else, and we associate that with what goal do you have, and then filter that through how do we perceive risk, that's when things can start to change because you have to kind of see past where you're at in order to really get a good feel of are we just afraid of something that we don't know that we haven't experienced yet? Or is it something that actually is a concern? When I think about risk, there's so many levels to risk. So I'm just going to give you some of the examples that show up, whether super small all the way to big. One of the bigger risks that I took, or something that could be perceived as a bigger risk, is when I left my engineering job. And a lot of people could argue, but engineering is so stable, but you went to school for all of these years, you're in a profession, you keep going, you can retire, you can have all insert the normal narrative around working in corporate. And for me, you have to ask yourself when it comes to how we perceive risk, what is it that you actually value? Because what I've learned is depending on what I value at a given time, the level of risk that I perceive something to have changes significantly. So, for example, if I'm in a place where I am prioritizing stable income coming in regularly, then of course leaving sounds extremely risky. However, if I look at it through the lens of, so back then I was thinking, well, one day I want to have a kid and I would love to be super present. And so the risk of me staying was potentially not being able to be present. So that was something that I was not willing, the risk out like did not outweigh the reward of being able to be present. And so this is just one way that you kind of start to see this duality that exists around what is a risk. Because also at the same time in 2020, the world was changing, so many things were happening. I think for a lot of people, it actually changed the way that we perceived the safetyness of if you can call it safetyness, but the way that we perceived how stable and how much we could rely on jobs, because we were seeing our world literally flip upside down in real time. Another example of risk that perhaps was not as significant is starting this podcast. I've loved the idea of podcasts forever. I've been listening to them since back when it was on iPods and all the things. So, love podcasts, love listening to them. But in my business, something that I see as a risk is anything that can impact my ability to be sustainable. So, when I am going and I'm adopting a new thing to do, whether that is a new way to show up for like in my marketing or a new sales process or whatever it might be, I like to think of it through the lens of can I see myself doing this for the next 6 months, the next 3 months, for a period of time that isn't just like here and gone. And so this is highlighting the risk of what if it doesn't go as planned? What if I show up and say I'm going to do this thing and I can't do it? And so in order for me to see the potential success, it requires messy action, which for a lot of people feels like risk, like, oh, what if the action's not good enough? What if? And so you can kind of see how we initially might filter something as this is a risk, but once we go a level deeper of really understanding where are we identifying that this is a risk, it really starts to get into a lot of other beliefs that we have. And then it's a matter of us making sure that we're syncing up with our values. So for me, I wanted a platform to be able to connect with my audience, to give value, to be able to share a lot of the things that I think about. And that outweighed the potential risk of, oh, what if it looks all messy to like start a podcast and all of these things. In summary, kind of wrapping this thought up of just the range that we can experience when it comes to experiencing risk, I think the sooner we get used to experiencing a healthy amount of discomfort, that is the place where we are expanding our comfort zone. And the sooner that we get used to that, to getting feedback and being less afraid of the potential failure we could experience, because if you think about it, those two examples, even though they were very different, are all essentially highlighting the fear of potential failure. Okay, what if I leave my job and it doesn't work out? Oh my gosh, and we lost all these things. Or what if I start this podcast and I don't follow through, which is not going to happen. But if I did, it's like, oh no, fear of failure and people are going to see me fail for all of these things. And it took me years, I'm going to be really honest, to realize that the only way to truly prevent your success from happening is quitting. And it's something that people say all the time, yet we still see people fall into that trap. And so it's really one of those common examples of this is very common knowledge, but not commonly practiced. So often we give up, or a day goes by that we didn't do exactly what we say. And instead of getting back up and doing it again, are you beating yourself up? But then you have to ask yourself, going back to those identities, if you were the future version of you who already had this, is that something that you would do? Would you treat that hiccup that way? Or would you just get back up and do it again? And I think a lot of this comes from being in our own heads and thinking that perfection is the measure of success, and that cannot be further from the truth. So, a really common life experience that illustrates this concept of risk taking is when you learn to ride a bicycle. When you first start to ride, there is a natural fear that you have of falling. You probably have wobbled, you lose your balance, and you might even tumble and scrape your knees. I know I had tons of scraped knees and elbows. However, in order to master the skill of learning how to ride the bike and enjoy that freedom of the wind whipping through your hair and zooming past, especially when you have really smooth grounds, it's the best thing ever. You have to overcome that fear. You have to take that risk of falling, and you have to persist even through those initial challenges that you're experiencing, questioning, "Am I doing this right? Oh my gosh, I might fall down," all of the things. We have to go through that in order to get to the other side. So, in this, if you're associating this to business, you riding your bicycle is the same as your journey towards your goal and the outcome that you want to achieve in your business. You know that this can be the vehicle for you to get there. You know that this can facilitate you getting there. You know that it's going to be amazing once you master how to ride it, once you get to the place that you want to go even quicker. But it comes with that risk of falling. And that could be either mistakes that you've made, things you've tried that didn't work out as great. And then you have to go ahead and take that risk, get on the bike and go ahead and push yourself outside of your comfort zone and start to embrace the uncertainty. I'm going to get on this bike and I might stumble and scrape my knees, or I might have the best ride of my life. And is that potential knee scraping so significant to you that you are willing to forego having the sun beat on your face with wind whipping through your hair? And ultimately, when we're able to lean into the uncertainty, lean into resistance, that's where we start to master that skill. That's where riding the bike gets easy, where you start to just get on the bike and you're going. Next thing you know, you might be looking for more challenging paths, or you're so excited to roll down the hill super fast because you know you have this. And that's the same thing that happens when we're seeing success because we showed up in spite of the fears, in spite of the perceived risk that we have and challenges that we could experience. And so it's the same with your business endeavors. It's going to require that we as founders take calculated risks, that we lean into facing uncertainties, that we overcome the initial fears that come with achieving our goals or potentially falling on our face on the road to achieving our goals. However, we know that for one, we didn't start this to have ordinary. And like I said before, in order for us to experience extraordinary, it's going to involve some level of risk. Even when I think about the fact that in corporate, ultimately, we're all working for someone who is just willing to take a risk that we weren't. And that's really fascinating when you really step back and really think about that. Even in the roles that we view as super safe, the person who started that took a risk that no one else was willing to do. They probably took a risk that at the time people thought they were absolutely crazy for doing. So often, people aren't really on board in the beginning phases of you establishing your vision because to create extraordinary things, it requires a vision that is so far outside of the norm and often off of the beaten path. And so the fact that it can get built up to what it is, it's such a testimony of how resilient we can truly be. And I think no matter how big of a change you are wanting to make in your business this year, how big of a change you want to make this quarter, what goals you want to achieve, when you were thinking about what that next step looks like, when you were thinking about how do you show up, how do you become the person that can easily and effortlessly have this. And this is not at all to say it's easy because if it was easy, everyone would do it, but it often is very simple. And when we can lean into that, we get to reap the rewards of doing so. Something that I found to be really helpful for me on this journey of learning to lean into uncertainties is to surround myself with people who have crazy visions and dreams just like I do. There's something so powerful about being in the room with other people who are on a mission to do something that is so much bigger than themselves, and it changes the way that you perceive what you're doing. And there's so much that we can talk about in terms of different mindsets, and maybe this will be another episode of my transition from an employee mindset to an entrepreneurial mindset, and I'm gonna be so transparent in saying that is a really challenging mold to break because for so much of growing up, we have been very conditioned to try and create safety for ourselves. If you think about how things are set up in society and how control is I'm not gonna get into that. We'll talk about this another time, but if you just look at the things around you and really start to filter out how you perceive things, and once we can start to really take that observer role within ourselves, I think that changes a lot of how we show up as well, especially as it relates to risk in our business. There's this other great quote that I really love, um, by the CEO of YouTube, Susan, and what she says is, "Rarely are opportunities presented to you in a perfect way, in a nice little box with a yellow bow on top. Here, open it. It's perfect. You'll love it." Opportunities, the really good ones, are messy, confusing, and hard to recognize. They're risky. They challenge you. And I think once we've committed ourselves to going down this path of being business owners, of being entrepreneurs, that's what we signed up for. We signed up for the messy, for problem solving, for being resourceful because the path is not laid out. This is not a job that has an SOP of how to do it. It is something that we have to be savvy in how we approach our businesses if we want to do this for the long haul, if we want to really experience how much potential is out there for us. So, in summary, when it comes to success, and I know that success is so personal, we all have very different goals with our business. For some, it might be, I want to have the most luxury car and the big house. For others, it might be, I just want, to have incredible time freedom. I want to be super present with my family, or it might be I want to take amazing vacations. It doesn't matter if you are the person who wants to be a world traveler or if you want to stay in your home and on the mountain or just go hiking whenever you feel like it or go to the gym in the middle of the day just because you can. Whatever your success is for you and in your business, it's going to require some amount of risk taking. And so I think instead of us trying to lean into avoiding risk, what would benefit us more is to be savvy and to be calculated about what risks are we taking. And is the version of me that I strive, is my successful version of myself, the one that I see having my exact goal, what would they think about this? When I look back at this, is this something that I can see as, oh, even though I tried and maybe it didn't work out as planned, I learned from it. There is this quote that comes up a lot in neurolinguistic programming, NLP, that I've been trained in, and it is, "There is no failure, it's only feedback." Everything you do, if it doesn't go as planned, it's a lesson. And the truth is, we learn so much more from our lessons than we ever do from everything going well. For example, in the beginning of my business, I hated going live. I literally would start sweating profusely. It was a hot mess. I could probably go find a video where I'm just so incredibly nervous. But every time I did it, every time I was nervous, every time someone hopped on or they didn't hop on, I was able to learn, okay, let me look back at my video, as cringy as it might feel. What am I doing well? What do I want to do again? How do I want to show up better next time? And I don't perceive that one off video, that one-off post, that one-off offer, whatever it is, as, "Oh, this is a sign of failure." Instead, I see it as, "Okay, what can I learn from it, and how do I use it to go forward?" Because I'm so committed to the vision that I am creating that I can't allow myself to get so caught up in this one-off task to allow it to feel like, "Oh, the risk I'm taking is so much bigger than where I wanna go." And so perhaps this kind of gets into a conversation of, is your vision and the reason that you're doing what you're doing big enough because I think when you have that really strong vision, especially when your vision is so much bigger than yourself, we start to view things so differently. And this is not a, I mean, obviously, use can like discernment here, but this is not a just be reckless, whatever. But you're all smart people who are listening. Like, you're smart, you're listening to this podcast. And so, but how can you really put the risk that you're taking into perspective and also allow it to be okay when something's just not for you? And that's another thing I've learned is not everything has to be for you, and not everyone's version of success is your version of success. And once we can be really honest about where it is that we're going, what are current limitations that you see, but where does that match up against where we want to be, it changes the entire conversation around what is risky and what is not, because you also have to factor in if you choose not to do it, are you okay with that outcome? Are you okay being that person? And another thing that comes back to my time at NLP is something called secondary gain, which is when we are in a pattern that we are either holding ourselves back or we are doing something that might not be for our greater good, we are oftentimes experiencing some type of benefit from doing it. So, for example, if I go back to the example of working at corporate, it could be something like, oh, me staying in corporate, even though it makes it where I couldn't be super present with my baby, the benefit could be that I don't have to show up. I don't have to put myself out there online because I'm just working a job. I don't have to push my personal growth, which means that I get to stay comfortable. That's a secondary gain. And we have to be really, really aware of where we are experiencing that, because that is something that can keep someone from being a savvy founder where they're able to be solution focused and find new areas and are constantly growing and evolving, to staying scattered where you have this dream, but you're also sabotaging yourself of not getting there. And I know that's not what we want to do. So, with that, risk taking is a prerequisite for success. And I hope with this episode that you were able to kind of see another way to start perceiving what it is that you're doing in your business so that you can make decisions that come from a more empowered place and not from a place of, oh my gosh, is this going to work out for me? And with that, thank you for tuning in to the Savvy Founder podcast. I hope that you enjoyed this episode. Feel free to take a screenshot and share what you've learned over on Instagram and tag me in it at essentially Jenae, and I'll see you in the next episode.